The rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire. Frontiers and foundations. The story of the Ottoman Empire begins not with the thunder of cannons or the majesty of imperial palaces, but with the fragile world of late medieval Anatolia. The 13th century was an age of transition. The once mighty Seljuk Sultanate of Rum, which had ruled central Anatolia for nearly 2 centuries, was undone by Mongol invasions and the fragmentation of authority. What remained was a mosaic of small Turkish principalities, or beyliks, scattered across the landscape. Each was ruled by a local warlord, their fortunes rising and falling with the shifting winds of politics and war. The Byzantine Empire, still claiming the legacy of Rome, lingered as a shadow of its former self. Constantinople remained a great city, but beyond its walls, Byzantine authority extended little further than the surrounding countryside. Most of Anatolia had slipped from its grasp. Meanwhile, across the plateau and valleys, Turkish lords forged alliances, traded, raided, and occasionally collapsed under stronger neighbors. It was a world of instability, but also one of opportunity. Among the leaders who emerged from this fractured environment was Osman, son of Ertugrul. Around 1300, Osman carved out a small principality near Surgut and Bursa. His warriors called themselves Ghazis, fighters for the faith, men who lived on the edge of Christendom and sought both material gain and spiritual reward. However, Osman had faith, yet Osman himself was not merely a raider. He was a shrewd leader, pragmatic in politics, and generous to those who fought for him. He distributed land to his warriors, welcomed converts into his ranks, and cultivated loyalty among diverse groups. Later storytellers surrounded his life with legend. One tale tells of Osman dreaming that a great tree grew from his body, its branches spreading across the world, symbolizing the vast empire his descendants would one day rule. Another depicts him as a divinely chosen warrior, destined to bring order to a fractured land. Whether literal or not, such stories reflected the reality that Osman laid the foundation for a dynasty, whose name, Arabicized as Ottoman or Ottoman, would endure for 6 centuries. From its earliest days, the Ottoman polity was shaped by hybridity. The Ottomans inherited the traditions of both nomadic steppe culture and settled agrarian society. Their cavalry was swift, lightly armed, and capable of devastating raids deep into enemy lands, echoing Turkic nomadic warfare. Yet they also developed institutions to make conquest permanent. Lands were granted as timars, military fiefs, binding cavalrymen to the Sultan in exchange for service. They appointed qadis, Islamic judges, to oversee law, but also absorbed Byzantine officials and Christian farmers into their system of governance. Faith and pragmatism blended seamlessly. The Ottomans were frontier lords, but they were also architects of state. Even in these early years, their system balanced flexibility with permanence, ideology with practicality. This balance, fragile but effective, would prove the secret to their astonishing rise. The role of Sufi orders in shaping early Ottoman identity. Central to the spiritual and social fabric of the early Ottoman state was the influence of Sufi orders, mystical brotherhoods that bridged the nomadic and settled worlds of Anatolia. Orders like the Bektashis and Naqshbandis played a pivotal role in uniting diverse tribes under a shared Islamic ethos, while providing ideological legitimacy to Osman's Ghazi warriors. These Sufis emphasized inner piety, communal harmony, and jihad against injustice, attracting followers from various ethnic and religious backgrounds, and facilitating conversions among Christians weary of Byzantine rule. A key figure in this spiritual landscape was Sheikh Edebali, Osman's mentor and father-in-law, whose guidance infused the nascent principality with moral purpose. Edebali, a revered Ahi leader and Sufi scholar, interpreted Osman's famous dream of the world-spanning tree as a divine mandate for empire building. His advice to Osman emphasized humility, justice, and service. "O son, you are the Emir. From now on, anger is for us. Clemency is for you. Our hearts will be broken, and you will repair them, but not vice versa. Patience is the key to leadership, and faith is its foundation." Sufi lodges, or tekkes, dotted the frontiers, serving as hubs for education, charity, and recruitment. They hosted rituals like the Sema dance, where dervishes whirled in ecstatic devotion, symbolizing union with the divine. This spiritual network helped Osman consolidate power, as Sufis mediated disputes, advised on governance, and spurred Ottoman influence through missionary work. By blending Turkic shamanistic elements with Islamic mysticism, these orders created a resilient cultural identity that propelled the Ottomans beyond mere survival, turning a frontier beylik into a burgeoning empire. Trade and economy in early Ottoman Anatolia. Fueling this early growth was a pragmatic economic foundation, rooted in trade routes and nomadic pastoralism. The Ottomans strategically positioned themselves along branches of the Silk Road, controlling passes and valleys that linked Persia, Central Asia, and the Mediterranean. Markets in Sugut and Bursa bustled with caravans carrying silks, spices, and furs, while local artisans produced wool, leather, and grains for export. A cornerstone of this economy was the introduction of the silver akçe coin around 1326 under Osman's son Orhan, marking a shift toward a more formalized monetary system. Weighing about 1.15 grams of silver, the akçe facilitated trade with Genoese and Venetian merchants, who established outposts in Anatolia, exchanging European cloth and metals for Ottoman goods. This currency not only stabilized local economies, but also distinguished the Ottomans from rival beyliks, many of which relied on debased or foreign coins. Nomadic herders provided mobility and resilience, grazing sheep and horses across vast pastures, while settled farmers in conquered lands paid taxes in kind. Osman encouraged intermarriage and alliances with merchants, granting tax exemptions to boost commerce. Imagine a vibrant Bursa market at dawn, camel caravans unloading Persian silks under the watchful eyes of Ottoman guards, coins clinking in exchanges that enriched the treasury and armed the ghazis. This economic adaptability, blending raid spoils with sustainable trade, laid the groundwork for the empire's expansion, turning opportunity into enduring power. Expansion into Europe and the Balkans. The Ottoman state might have remained a regional power, one among many Anatolian beyliks, had it not crossed into Europe. In 1354, an earthquake damaged the Byzantine fortress of Gallipoli on the European shore of the Dardanelles. The Ottomans seized the ruined stronghold and transformed it into their first bridgehead in Europe. That single stroke altered the course of their history. From Gallipoli, Ottoman armies pushed into Thrace and Macedonia. Byzantine weakness and internal civil wars made their advance easier. Local laws, caught between submission and destruction, often chose the former. As Ottoman forces spread, they integrated rather than annihilated, allowing peasants to remain on their lands, and often leaving Christian nobles in place under new overlordship. This pragmatic approach won them stability. The decisive moment came in 1389, at the Battle of Kosovo. Sultan Murad I led his forces against a coalition of Serbian and Balkan nobles. The battle was fierce, and Murad himself was killed, but the Ottomans held the field. For the Serbs, Kosovo became a national epic, remembered as a day of heroic sacrifice. For the Ottomans, it was confirmation of their destiny in Europe. Just 7 years later, in 1496, a crusading army of French, Hungarian, and other European knights marched against the Ottomans. At Nicopolis, on the Danube, they met disaster. The heavily armored knights charged recklessly, only to be surrounded and cut down by Ottoman cavalry and janissaries. "Wow, Gemsi, what are we after a set?" Chroniclers described the slaughter of prisoners, the drowning of survivors in the Danube, and the humiliation of Europe's nobility. The victory announced that the Ottomans were no longer just a frontier principality, they were a rising empire. By the dawn of the 15th century, Ottoman banners flew over much of the Balkans and western Anatolia. Bursa flourished as their capital, hosting merchants from Persia, Central Asia, and beyond. Mosques and caravanserais dotted the landscape, and the call to prayer rang across conquered cities. For Christians of the Balkans, life under the Ottomans meant new taxes and overlords, but also continuity in daily rhythms of village and church life. Europe took notice. The Ottomans were no longer dismissed as raiders, they were acknowledged as a formidable new power. Their presence in the Balkans would shape European politics for centuries to come, embedding the Ottomans firmly in both Eastern and Western history. Ottoman siege warfare and military innovations. Beyond marquee battles like Kosovo and Mykopolis, Ottoman military prowess shone in sieges and raids that methodically eroded enemy defenses. Campaigns, such as the 1430 conquest of Thessaloniki, exemplified their evolving tactics, blending speed, engineering, and psychological warfare. Light cavalry units, known as Akinci raiders, played a starring role, scouting ahead, harassing supply lines, and sowing terror in enemy territories. Akinci, meaning raiders in Turkish, were irregular horsemen from frontier regions, thriving on plunder and exempt from taxes in exchange for service. Clad in light armor with bows, lances, and sabers, they struck like shadows, ambushing convoys and burning villages to weaken morale. Chroniclers describe their tactics as relentless. They moved like the wind, appearing suddenly to cut down stragglers and vanish before reinforcements arrived. In sieges, Akinci isolated cities by blocking roads, while Ottoman engineers built trenches and early artillery bombarded walls. Compared to Byzantine static defenses or European heavy knights, Ottoman flexibility, combining Akinci mobility with disciplined infantry, proved superior. The fall of Adrianople Edierne in 1361, where raiders encircled the city for months, forcing surrender without a full assault, highlighted this. These innovations not only secured territories, but also integrated conquered peoples, as many Akinci recruits came from Balkan converts, forging a multicultural army that propelled further expansions. Crisis and resilience. Empires often face their greatest test, not in victory, but in defeat. For the Ottomans, that moment came in 1402, when Sultan Bayezid I confronted Timur, the fearsome Central Asian conqueror. At the Battle of Ankara, the Ottomans were crushed. Bayezid was captured, humiliated, and soon died in captivity. The once unstoppable Ottoman advance ground to a halt. What followed was a decade of chaos, known as the Interregnum. Bayezid's sons fought bitterly for control, each declaring himself sultan, each supported by rival factions. Provinces splintered, rivals encroached, and many believed the dynasty would vanish as quickly as it had risen. Yet the Ottomans endured. In 1413, Mehmed I emerged victorious, reuniting the fractured state. The institutions built by Osman and his heirs proved resilient. The Timar system tied cavalry to service. The janissaries provided discipline. Islamic courts maintained order. Even in the face of near collapse, the skeleton of empire remained intact. Under Murad II, the Ottomans resumed their expansion, reconquering lost lands and stabilizing their frontiers. His reign saw new clashes with Hungary and the Balkans, but also treaties and periods of peace. Most importantly, he prepared the way for his son, Mehmed II, who would accomplish the greatest conquest of all, The survival of the Ottoman state after Ankara was not inevitable. Many principalities had risen and fallen in Anatolia, leaving little trace. What distinguished the Ottomans was not merely military success, but institutional depth, flexibility, and the ability to absorb crises without disintegration. This capacity for resilience would sustain them for centuries, even in the face of setbacks far greater than Timur's devastating victory. Social impact of Timur's invasion. The Battle of Ankara in 1402 not only shattered Ottoman military might, but also unleashed profound social disruptions across Anatolia and the Balkans. Timur's armies, sweeping through like a scourge, sacked cities, enslaved artisans, and disrupted trade routes, forcing mass migrations. Refugees, merchants, farmers, and artisans fled ravaged towns like Ankara and Bursa, swelling urban populations and straining resources. Villages emptied as families sought safety in Ottoman strongholds or Byzantine territories, leading to agricultural collapse and famine in some regions. Culturally, the invasion sparked exchanges amid the chaos. Timurid miniature art influenced Ottoman styles, introducing vibrant colors and intricate motifs to manuscripts and ceramics. Yet, the human cost was immense. Chroniclers recount tales of families torn apart, with skilled craftsmen like weavers and metalworkers deported to Samarkand to bolster Timur's capital. Imagine a merchant from Ankara, his wares scattered in the dust, fleeing with his family across barren plains, only to rebuild in a distant province under a new sultan. This upheaval tested social bonds, but Ottoman institutions adapted. Sufi orders provided aid, distributing food. It's proved by children's payments and mysteries. This mathematic females? Ultimately, Timur's raid, intended to secure his western flank, inadvertently strengthened Ottoman unity, paving the way for Mehmed I's reunification and the empire's rebirth. The conquest of Constantinople. By the mid-15th century, the Ottomans had transformed themselves from frontier lords into a formidable imperial power. Yet one prize eluded them: Constantinople, the fabled capital of Byzantium. Its massive Theodosian walls, stretching miles across the landward side, had withstood centuries of sieges. While the city's symbolic weight was immense, it was the heir of Rome, the bastion of Christendom in the east, and a beacon to both merchants and pilgrims. To conquer Constantinople would be to proclaim Ottoman supremacy, not just in Anatolia or the Balkans, but across the known world. Sultan Mehmed II, who came to the throne in 1451 at the age of 19, understood this. From the outset of his reign, he prepared meticulously for the city's capture. He built the fortress of Rumeli Hizari on the Bosporus, directly opposite the older Anatolia Hizari, to choke off the strait and prevent aid from reaching Constantinople. He summoned Hungarian engineers, including the famed Orban, to cast massive bronze cannons capable of hurling stone balls weighing hundreds of pounds. These superguns, though slow to reload, symbolized the technological shift that would make ancient walls vulnerable. In April 1453, Mehmed's army, perhaps 80,000 strong, encircled the city. The defenders, led by Emperor Constantine XI, numbered perhaps 7,000, including Genoese and Venetian allies. Chains stretched across the Golden Horn to block the Ottoman fleet, while the city's defenders patched walls nightly under constant bombardment. For weeks, the siege raged. Ottoman engineers tunneled beneath the walls, only to be discovered and repelled. Naval skirmishes erupted, as Mehmed daringly transported ships overland, greased logs carrying vessels into the Golden Horn to bypass the chain. Chroniclers describe the thunder of the great cannons, the trembling of the earth, and the haunting prayers rising from both sides. Inside Hagia Sophia, processions carried icons and relics, beseeching divine intervention. Outside, imams and dervishes rallied the troops with fiery sermons. On May 29th, Mehmed ordered the final assault. Waves of soldiers surged against the battered walls, irregulars first, then Anatolian troops, and finally the elite Janissaries. In the chaos, a small gate was forced open. Defenders fell back. The walls were breached. Emperor Constantine XI, clad in imperial purple, is said to have cast off his regalia and perished in combat. By dawn, the city was in Ottoman hands. The fall of Constantinople reverberated worldwide. In Europe, it was mourned as the end of Rome's thousand-year legacy. Magic found won the beaches more the Romes and counters. And markets reopened, new mosques and palaces rose, and the city, now Istanbul, became the vibrant heart of empire. Mehmed earned the title the Conqueror, and rightly so. By capturing Constantinople, he did more than win a city. He gave the Ottomans a capital worthy of empire, straddling Europe and Asia, blending ancient heritage with new ambitions. The conquest marked a new phase. The Ottomans were no longer regional lords. They were a world empire. Life in Istanbul. After 1453. The transformation of Constantinople into Istanbul was as much a social rebirth as a military triumph. Mehmed II orchestrated a massive repopulation effort, forcibly relocating families from Anatolia and the Balkans to revive the depleted city. Byzantine artisans, skilled in mosaics and architecture, were integrated alongside Turkish builders, fostering a hybrid culture. The Sultan invested in infrastructure. Aqueducts repaired from Roman times brought fresh water, while the Bedtime market became a hub for silks, spices, and jewels. Chronicler Critolvolos, a Greek scholar in Mehmed's service, vividly described the post-conquest scene. Bustling streets where honorable old men mingled with new settlers, churches converted to mosques, standing beside synagogues, and markets teeming with diverse tongues, Greek, Turkish, Armenian. Daily life blended continuity and change. Greek fishermen hauled catches from the Bosporus. Ottoman officials collected taxes in Akçay, and interfaith neighborhoods emerged under the millet system. Visualize a Byzantine artisan, once crafting icons, now designing tiles for a new mosque, chatting with a Turkish merchant over coffee in rebuilt tavern. This fusion not only stabilized the city, but enriched it, turning Istanbul into a cosmopolitan crossroads that symbolized the empire's inclusive pragmatism. Building an imperial system. Conquest alone cannot sustain empire. To govern diverse peoples' vast territories, the Ottomans developed institutions that combined Islamic principles, pragmatic adaptations, and innovations of their own. Central to this system was the Devshirme levy. Periodically, Christian boys from the Balkans were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained for state service. Some became Janissaries, the elite infantry corps known for their discipline, distinctive uniforms, and fearsome reputation. Others were educated for administrative posts, rising to positions of immense power as viziers, generals, or governors. Though coercive, the system created a loyal cadre of servants bound directly to the Sultan. The Janissaries themselves symbolized the empire's military revolution. Unlike feudal cavalry bound by land grants, they were salaried professionals, trained in firearms and disciplined in formation. Their loyalty to the Sultan made them both indispensable and powerful. On one hand, The Ottoman bureaucracy, centered in the palace, was headed by the Grand Vizier, who functioned as chief minister. Beneath him, a hierarchy of viziers, judges, and scribes managed the complex machinery of empire. The palace itself was not merely a residence, but the nexus of government. Its rituals, ceremonies, and seclusion reinforced the mystique of the sultan, who was seen as God's shadow on earth. The harem, often sensationalized in European imagination, was not simply a place of leisure, but a political institution. The sultan's consorts, concubines, and above all, his mother, the valid sultan, wielded significant influence. Through marriage alliances, patronage, and succession politics, the women of the harem could shape the course of empire. Religious diversity was accommodated through the millet system. Non-Muslim communities, primarily Greek Orthodox Christians, Armenians, and Jews, were organized under their own religious leaders. The Greek Patriarch in Istanbul, the Armenian Patriarch, and the Chief Rabbi oversaw schools, courts, and welfare institutions for their flocks. In exchange for loyalty and taxes, they enjoyed a degree of autonomy. This arrangement allowed the empire to govern a patchwork of peoples while maintaining stability. Economically, the Timar system tied cavalry service to landholding. Sipahi cavalry were granted estates, from which they collected taxes in return for military service. This decentralized system provided both local stability and a reservoir of troops. At the same time, the empire's cities thrived as commercial hubs. Caravanserais, markets, and guilds connected Anatolia, the Balkans, and the Middle East to global trade networks. By blending Islamic law, Sharia, with sultanic decrees, Kanun, the Ottomans created a legal system, both flexible and authoritative. Cadis, appointed judges, administered justice across the provinces, ensuring that imperial law reached even distant villages. The Ottoman imperial system, forged in the 15th and 16th centuries, proved remarkably durable. It bound together Muslims and Christians, peasants and merchants, warriors and scholars, into a single polity. Its success lay not in uniformity, but in pragmatic diversity, a recognition that empire required both order and accommodation. I find the most fundamental scale for me Devshirme system, lives and legacies. The Devshirme levy, while coercive, produced some of the empire's most influential figures, exemplifying its meritocratic ethos. Recruiters scored Balkan villages every few years, selecting healthy Christian boys aged 8 to 18, converting them to Islam, and enrolling them in rigorous training at Istanbul's Enderun schools. There, they studied languages, administration, and military arts, emerging as loyal servants unbound by family ties. A prime example is Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, born Bajica Sokolovic in 1506 to a Serbian Orthodox family in Herzegovina. Taken via Devshirme, he rose through the ranks, from palace page to janissary commander, then governor, and finally Grand Vizier under 3 sultans, 1555 to 1579. As vizier, he oversaw naval expansions, built the Sokolu Mehmed Pasha Mosque, and even restored the Serbian Orthodox Patriarchate of Peć in 1557, aiding his homeland. His story, from a village boy to architect of empire, illustrates Devshirme's dual edge, opportunity for the talented, but heartbreak for families, who sometimes resisted with hidden children or bribes. Socially, Devshirme integrated Balkans into the elite, reducing revolts and fostering loyalty. Yet, It sparked resentment, with tales of mothers mourning lost sons. Over time, as the system waned, its legacies rise to the multicultural bureaucracy that sustained the empire. The age of Selim and Suleiman. The 16th century marked the high tide of Ottoman power, shaped above all by two rulers, Selim I and his son, Suleiman. Selim I, known as the Grim, reigned from 1512 to 1520. He was ruthless, ambitious, and transformative. In 1514, he marched east against the Safavids of Persia, whose Shia Islam challenged Ottoman Sunni orthodoxy. At Chowdaran, Ottoman artillery and disciplined janissaries devastated the Safavid cavalry, securing eastern Anatolia. 2 years later, Selim turned south. In rapid campaigns, he defeated the Mamluks of Egypt, annexing Syria, Palestine, and the fertile Nile Valley. Cairo, once a rival capital, now submitted to Ottoman rule. Most significantly, Selim gained custody of Islam's holy cities, Mecca and Medina. The symbolic weight was immense. The sultans now styled themselves not only rulers, but protectors of the Haramain and heirs to the caliphate. Pilgrims traveling to Mecca did so under Ottoman protection, their caravans guarded by imperial troops. With these conquests, the Ottomans became the preeminent power of the Muslim world. When Selim died in 1520, his son Suleiman ascended the throne. His reign, lasting nearly half a century, became the empire's golden age. "I just want to know where we are. We are all," end quote. Known in the West as the Magnificent, and to his subjects as Kanuni, the lawgiver, Suleiman combined relentless expansion with cultural brilliance. In Europe, he struck at Hungary. At Mohacs in 1526, his armies annihilated the Hungarian kingdom in a single day, the young king perishing on the battlefield. 3 years later, he laid siege to Vienna, only narrowly repelled. Throughout his reign, wars with the Habsburgs kept Central Europe in tension. In the east, Suleiman battled the Safavids, capturing Baghdad in 1534 and bringing Mesopotamia into Ottoman domains. In the Mediterranean, his admiral Harad-Din Barbarossa dominated the seas, defeating Christian fleets at Preveza in 1538 and making the Sultan master of North Africa. Yet Suleiman was more than a conqueror. He was dead, he said, he codified laws, harmonizing Islamic and sultanic codes. His court was a center of poetry and philosophy. He himself wrote verses under the pen name Muhibi, revealing a sensitive mind behind the imperial facade. The great architect Sinan, a former Christian boy taken through the Devshirme, reshaped Istanbul with mosques, bridges, and aqueducts. His Süleymaniye Mosque, perched on a hill overlooking the Golden Horn, symbolized both piety and imperial grandeur. Culturally, Suleiman's reign saw a flourishing of art, music, and literature. Istanbul became a global city, its markets filled with silks, spices, furs, and jewels. Coffee houses buzzed with conversation and storytelling. Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities coexisted under the millet system, contributing to the empire's rich tapestry. By the time of Suleiman's death in 1566, the Ottoman Empire stretched from the gates of Vienna to the deserts of Arabia, from the mountains of Persia to the shores of Algiers. It was not only a military superpower, but also a civilization at its peak, admired and feared in equal measure. Sultan and women's influence. Amid Suleiman's grandeur, women wielded subtle yet profound power, none more so than Hurrem Sultan, his beloved consort, known in the West as Roxolana. Born around 1502 in Ruthenia, modern Ukraine, she entered the harem as a slave, but rose through intellect and charm to become Suleiman's legal wife in 1533. a rare honor challenging Ottoman traditions. Ulem influenced policy through patronage and alliances, founding the Haseki Sultan complex in Istanbul, which included a mosque, school, and hospital, showcasing her charitable works. Her correspondence with Suleiman reveals deep affection. "My Sultan, you are on the path to win victories. I wish for your success. However, my greatest wish is to be reunited with you." 61. Another letter ends, "I wish nothing but happiness for you, in both worlds, your poor and lowly slave, Harem." Challenging harem stereotypes, Hurrem advised on diplomacy, securing alliances and influencing succession for her son Selim II. Her rise empowered other women, like Valide sultans, to shape empire from behind the lattice screens, blending love, politics, and legacy, culture and Golden Age society. The reign of Suleiman the Magnificent is often remembered for its conquests and political might, but equally important was the flourishing of culture, society, and daily life. In the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire was not only a military power, but also a vibrant civilization, where art, architecture, religion, and commerce intertwined. At the heart of this cultural efflorescence stood Istanbul, the empire's capital. Its skyline, crowned by domes and minarets, reflected both continuity with Byzantine traditions and bold new Ottoman visions. The architect Sinan, a genius of structural engineering, left an indelible mark. His mosques were marvels of light and space, domes fluting as if suspended in air, courtyards that welcomed reflection, and minarets that pierced the sky. The Suleymaniye Mosque, completed in 1557, embodied this aesthetic grandeur. Built not only as a house of worship, but as a complex with schools, hospitals, kitchens, and baths, it symbolized the union of piety, welfare, and imperial power. Art flourished alongside architecture. Calligraphers, revered as masters of the written word, transformed Quranic verses into flowing works of beauty. Miniature painters illustrated manuscripts with vivid scenes of battles, banquets, and legends, blending Persian, Turkish, and Byzantine traditions. Music thrived in both courtly and popular settings, where instruments like the ney reed flute, oud lute, and canon ziva accompanied poetry and song. The Ottoman court became a hub of intellectual life. Suleiman himself wrote poetry under the pen name Mohibi, producing verses on love, faith, and kingship. Scholars debated law, philosophy, and theology in madrasas, while Sufi mystics spread devotional traditions across the empire. The Mevlevis, or whirling dervishes, expressed spirituality through dance, their spinning rituals captivating both Ottomans and Europeans alike. Beyond the court, urban society was rich and layered. The Grand Bazaar of Istanbul bustled with goods from across the globe. Silks from Persia, coffee from Yemen, spices from India, wool from Anatolia, and furs from the Black Sea. Guilds, or esnaf, regulated trades, ensuring quality and prices, while also providing neutral aid to members. Coffee houses, first spreading in the 16th century, became essential social spaces. Men gathered to drink coffee, listen to storytellers, play chess, and discuss politics. Authorities occasionally tried to ban them, fearing dissent, but they always returned, becoming a hallmark of Ottoman life. Cuisine mirrored the empire's diversity. Dishes like rice pilafs, lamb stews, stuffed vegetables, and baklava with honey reflected Anatolian, Arab, and Persian influences. Coffee, introduced from Yemen, transformed daily habits, eventually spreading to Europe and sparking its own coffeehouse cultures. Clothing marked rank and identity. Viziers and scholars wore robes of silk, merchants donned modest but fine garments, while peasants dressed in wool and cotton. Turbans varied in fold and size, signaling profession and status. Religious diversity was a hallmark of Ottoman society. The millet system allowed Christian and Jewish communities to govern their own internal affairs. The Greek Orthodox Patriarch oversaw the spiritual life of millions of Christians, while the Armenian Patriarch and Jewish Chief Rabbi did the same for their communities. Though Muslims held superior status, and non-Muslims paid special taxes like the jizya, this arrangement fostered coexistence. In many cities, mosques stood beside churches and synagogues, and multiple languages filled the streets: Turkish, Greek, Armenian, Arabic, Ladino, Persian. Outside the great cities, provincial life had its own rhythms. In Aleppo and Damascus, caravanserais hosted merchants traveling between Asia and Europe. In Cairo, scholars debated at Al-Azhar, while grain from the Nile fed Istanbul. In Anatolia and the Balkans, peasants farmed wheat, barley, and grapes, tied to the cycles of the seasons and the obligations of taxes. Despite empire-wide diversity, most Ottoman subjects experienced life through their village, guild, or religious community. Ceremony and spectacle reinforced hierarchy. Ambassadors arriving atop cupolas described processions of janissaries, gilded halls, and the sultan enthroned under a canopy of gold. The rituals impressed foreign visitors, signaling power and order. For subjects, festivals marked the calendar: Ramadan with nightly feasts, circumcirculation ceremonies for princes, military parades, and public entertainments with acrobats and musicians. The 16th century was thus more than an age of conquests. It was a golden age of society and culture, where Istanbul became a crossroads of worlds, and the Ottoman Empire projected not only power, but also a distinctive civilization. The empire was at once Islamic and cosmopolitan, hierarchical, yet accommodating, deeply traditional, yet endlessly adaptive. Ottoman science and intellectual life. The Golden Age's intellectual vibrancy extended to science and scholarship, where Ottoman minds advanced astronomy, medicine, and mathematics through synthesis and innovation. At the forefront was Taqi al-Din, a polymath who founded Istanbul's first observatory in 1577 under Sultan Murad III. Perched in Galata, it housed instruments like armillary spheres and sextants, rivaling Europe's best. Taqi al-Din observed stars and planets, compiling Sijé tables more accurate than Tycho Brahe's, and even predicted a comet in 1577. Medicine flourished in hospital complexes like the Suleymaniye, where physicians drew on Ibn Sina's canon, treating ailments with herbal remedies and surgery. Exchanges with Europe grew. Translations of Greek texts via Venetian presses enriched libraries, while cartographers like Piri produced world maps in 1513, incorporating Columbus's discoveries. Scholars debated in madrasas, blending Islamic theology with empirical inquiry. Picture Taqi al-Din at night, peering through a telescope amid the minaret's silhouettes, his work bridging east and west. Though the observatory was demolished in 1580, amid superstitions, this era's pursuits underscored the empire's role as a scientific crossroads. 17th century strains. Strange, strange, mate. 17th century strains. Slowly leading, bass mate, note. By the 17th century, the empire's expansion slowed, and new challenges emerged. The age of rapid conquest was over. Now the Ottomans faced the far harder task of sustaining their vast dominion amid political, economic, and military strains. Externally, wars with Europe continued, but produced fewer decisive results. In Hungary, campaigns against the Habsburgs dragged on with fluctuating front lines. The Treaty of Sitzvatorok in 1606 symbolized a turning point. For the first time in a century, the Ottomans negotiated with the Habsburgs as equals, rather than dictating terms. Against the Safavids in Persia, the empire fought repeated wars over Mesopotamia and eastern Anatolia, with borders shifting, but no lasting resolution. On the northern frontier, conflicts with Poland and Russia introduced new rivals. Internally, the Janissaries, once elite shock troops, grew into a powerful and unruly political class. No longer exclusively recruited through the Devshirme, they admitted Muslims and even passed membership hereditarily, undermining their original discipline. By the early 160s, the Janissaries wielded enough influence to depose sultans. In 1622, they murdered Sultan Osman II, who had attempted to curb their power. Such events revealed the dangers of military factions within the state. In the provinces, unrest was widespread. Anatolia experienced the Salali uprisings, violent rebellions sparked by high taxes, inflation, and the breakdown of local order. Villages were pillaged, peasants fled to cities or joined bandit bands, and agricultural life suffered. The economy struggled further due to global changes. Silver from the Americas flooded European markets, fueling inflation that destabilized Ottoman finances. Yet the empire did not collapse. Istanbul remained a city of immense wealth and beauty, home to perhaps 500,000 people. Its mosques and markets still dazzled visitors. Coffee houses multiplied, despite official bans, as centers of storytelling, poetry, and political gossip. Cultural life persisted. Poets wrote in Turkish, Persian, and Arabic. Calligraphers perfected ornate scripts. Musicians refined Ottoman classical traditions. This era also saw the rise of the so-called Sultanate of Women. When sultans ascended the throne young or disinterested in government, their mothers and consorts wielded influence through the harem. Figures like Kursum Sultan and Turhan Sultan guided policy, made appointments, and acted as regents. Sometimes, they stabilized the empire. At other times, their rivalries deepened palace intrigues. European observers marveled and sometimes mocked the idea of women directing an Islamic empire. But their power was real. Diplomatically, the Ottomans still commanded respect. Ambassadors described the awe of meeting the Sultan in Topkapi, with ceremonies carefully designed to display majesty. Yet beneath the grandeur, strains were evident. Corruption in tax collection, weakening of the Timur cavalry system, and provincial governors carving out greater autonomy. Despite challenges, the 17th century revealed the empire's resilience. Even as institutions strained, cultural production thrived, urban life flourished, and the empire remained a formidable power. The Ottomans were no longer unstoppable conquerors, but they were far from decline into irrelevance. Economic crisis and global trade shifts. Compounding military and political strains were economic upheavals driven by global shifts. The influx of American silver into Europe triggered the price revolution, devaluing currencies and sparking inflation across the Ottoman realm. By the 1580s, the silver akçe lost about 30% of its value, with official devaluation in 1585 to 1586, halving its worth against foreign coins like the Venetian ducat. This eroded purchasing power, fueling unrest like the Salali rebellions, as taxes rose while income stagnated. Trade imbalances worsened. The declining Silk Road, bypassed by European sea routes, shifted commerce to maritime ports like Izmir, where deals adapted by focusing on cotton and tobacco exports. Merchants pivoted to Indian Ocean spices and European manufactures, but often on unfavorable terms, as Ottoman tariffs favored foreigners. Picture a Constantinople merchant in the 1580s, his akçe savings dwindling, bargaining harder in the Grand Bazaar amid rising prices. These crises prompted reforms, like minting new coins, but highlighted the empire's vulnerability to global forces, setting the stage for later dependencies. The Köprülü viziers and mid-century reforms. Amid turmoil, the Köprülü family emerged as saviors, instituting reforms that stabilized the empire. Khosrow Mehmed Pasha, appointed Grand Vizier in 1656 by Sultan Mehmed IV, demanded absolute authority to purge corruption. Dubbed the Iron Vizier, he executed rivals, reorganized the army, and suppressed janissary rebellions, restoring central control. His reforms included military purges, reinstating Timur discipline, and fiscal overhauls to balance budgets strained by wars. In 1657 to 1658, he quelled Transylvanian unrest and defeated Venetian fleets, reclaiming Crete by 1669. His son, Fazıl Ahmed Pasha, continued, conquering Crete and expanding into Poland. These efforts briefly revived Ottoman power, emphasizing merit over nepotism. Khosrow's legacy, a blueprint for survival through ruthless efficiency, proving the empire could adapt even in decline. 18th century adjustments. The 18th century brought further changes, as the empire adjusted to a shifting world where European powers grew stronger. Militarily, wars with Austria and Russia defined the era. Russia, under rulers like Peter the Great and Catherine the Great, pressed southward toward the Black Sea. The Ottomans fought valiantly, but suffered setbacks. The Treaty of Küçükçaynaca in 1774 was particularly devastating. The empire lost Crimea, and Russia gained the right to intervene on behalf of Orthodox Christians within Ottoman lands, a precedent that would haunt the empire. The empire's military struggled to keep pace with European innovations. While Ottoman armies still fielded janissaries and cavalry, European forces refined discipline, drilled professional troops, and improved artillery. Reform-minded viziers recognized the need for change. New military schools, modeled on European academies, were founded. Students studied mathematics, engineering, and gunnery, sometimes taught by foreign advisors. "And Carmens," replied Ajak. Officers were sent to Paris and Vienna to observe modern tactics. At court and in society, Western influence grew. Ottoman elites began to adopt European fashions. French jackets might appear beside Ottoman robes. Powdered wigs mingled with turbans. Diplomatic missions exposed Ottoman officials to European theaters, salons, and coffee houses, broadening horizons. In Istanbul, architecture began to incorporate Baroque styles, blending European aesthetics with Ottoman traditions. Economically, the empire became more tied to global trade. Port cities like Izmir, Aleppo, and Salonika thrived as centers of commerce. Caravans carried silk from Iran. Ships unloaded spices and coffee from the Indian Ocean. European merchants brought cloth, silver, and manufactured goods. The empire was increasingly part of the global economy, though often on terms that favored European powers. Istanbul remained a cosmopolitan hub. Turks, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Arabs, and foreigners shared neighborhoods and markets. The city's population swelled and fluctuated with trade and migration. Provincial cities also flourished, with Aleppo serving as a commercial crossroads, and Cairo as a cultural capital of the Arab world. Culturally, the 18th century saw continuity and change. Poetry, calligraphy, and music remained central, but Western influences appeared in theater, painting, and fashion. Coffee houses continued to thrive as centers of debate, while new entertainments like fireworks and public spectacles added color to urban life. Though the empire's military and political power waned relative to Europe, its ability to adapt was striking. Far from a static society, the Ottomans experimented with reform, absorbed foreign influences, and maintained a vibrant cultural life. By 1800, however, the need for deeper change was undeniable. The 19th century would bring challenges that could no longer be postponed. Tanzimat Reform Era. By the early 19th century, the Ottoman Empire confronted crises that could no longer be solved by ad hoc adaptation. European powers had leapt ahead in technology, military discipline, and global wealth. The Ottomans, though still vast, risked falling irreversibly behind. Reform was no longer a choice, but a necessity. The reform era began in earnest with the Tanzimat, or reorganization, launched in 1839. The Gulhani Edict, read aloud in Istanbul, promised equality before the law for all subjects, regardless of religion, the security of life and property, and the modernization of taxation and conscription. Samban is always coming to the United Nations with the government, Newcastle. A second decree, in 1856, expanded these promises, explicitly addressing the concerns of Christian powers after the Crimean War. These reforms sought to reshape the empire into a modern state able to stand among European nations. The Tanzimat touched nearly every aspect of life. Bureaucracies expanded rapidly, staffed by men educated in new secular schools that emphasized modern sciences, languages, and law. Railways and telegraphs shrank distances, linking provinces to the capital. Postal services spread, bringing new speed to communication. Uniforms for soldiers and officials reflected European styles. The fez, adopted as a symbol of modern Ottoman identity, replaced the traditional turban. Urban landscapes changed. Istanbul's skyline gained buildings in neoclassical and Baroque styles, standing beside mosques and domes of earlier centuries. In cities across the empire, new administrative offices, courthouses, and schools symbolized reform. Streets were widened, lamps lit the nights, and foreign engineers supervised infrastructure projects. Culturally, the Tanzimat was a renaissance. Newspapers multiplied in Turkish, Greek, Armenian, Arabic, and Ladino, spreading literacy and political debate. Intellectuals, known as the Young Ottomans, embraced European liberal ideals, but sought to harmonize them with Islamic principles. They debated constitutionalism, liberty, and the balance of tradition with modernity. For the first time, novels appeared in Ottoman Turkish, blending European literary forms with local stories. Theaters staged plays, salons hosted debates, and translations brought Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Voltaire into Ottoman discourse. Women's voices began to emerge more strongly. Though still limited by custom, educated women published essays and articles, advocating for schooling and greater participation in public life. Families in cities sent daughters to new schools, and journals devoted to women's issues circulated among elites. Though progress was slow, these developments marked the beginnings of an Ottoman women's movement. Yet reform came at a cost. Wars remained expensive, and modernization projects required loans from European financiers. By the 1870s, the empire was burdened with crushing debt, forcing the creation of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration in 1881, which gave European creditors control over customs revenues and taxes. The humiliation was profound. Sovereignty itself seemed compromised. Externally, reforms failed to stop European encroachment. The Crimean War 1853-56, in which the Ottomans allied with Britain and France against Russia, showed both strengths and weaknesses. Ottoman soldiers fought bravely, but the war exposed logistical and technological gaps. Though the empire emerged diplomatically intact, it was clear that survival increasingly depended on European support. The Tanzimat was thus a paradox. It brought modernization, new rights, and cultural flooring, but it also deepened dependency and debt. It fostered hopes of renewal, but could not stem the tide of nationalist uprisings and European interventions. By the late 19th century, the question was no longer whether the empire could reform, but whether it could endure. Ottoman diplomacy in the 19th century. Tanzimat's success hinged on diplomacy, with envoys like Mustafa Reshid Pasha bridging east and west. As ambassador to Paris, 1834 to 1835, 1941, and London, 1836 to 1838, Reshid forged ties with European powers, negotiating Algerian issues and advocating reforms. His 1839 memorandum to British Foreign Secretary Palmerston outlined Ottoman weaknesses and proposed modernization to counter Russian threats. These missions exposed Ottomans to innovations. Reshid marveled at steam engines and operas, importing ideas like secular education. Diplomacy secured alliances during the Crimean War, but deepened dependencies through loans. Envoys' reports, blending admiration and caution, shaped Tanzimat, turning Istanbul into a hub of global intrigue. Nationalism and disintegration. The 19th century was also the century of nationalism, and for the Ottoman Empire, nationalism proved both irresistible and devastating. Across the Balkans and the Middle East, subject peoples began to see themselves not simply as communities within the empire, but as distinct nations demanding independence. The first great blow was the Greek War of Independence, 1821-29. Inspired by European Romantic nationalism and supported by Philhellenese abroad, Greek rebels rose against Ottoman rule. The conflict was brutal, marked by massacres on both sides. European powers, Britain, France, and Russia, eventually intervened militarily, destroying the Ottoman Egyptian fleet at Navarino in 1827. By 1830, Greece won independence, setting a precedent for other peoples. Serbia had already secured autonomy earlier in the century. Over time, Romania, Bulgaria, and Montenegro followed. Each loss not only shrank Ottoman territory, but also sent waves of Muslim refugees, known as muhajers, streaming into Anatolia, altering demographics and intensifying tensions. The Crimean War briefly rallied the empire, as Ottoman troops fought alongside Western allies, but it also demonstrated the empire's growing reliance on outside support. Worse followed in the Russo-Turkish War of 1877-78. Ottoman forces were overwhelmed, and the resulting Treaty of San Stefano granted independence or autonomy to several Balkan states. The subsequent Treaty of Berlin trimmed back Russian gains, but confirmed the empire's retreat from Europe. Bosnia and Herzegovina were occupied by Austria-Hungary, while Britain took control of Cyprus. Nationalism was not limited to Christians. In the late 19th century, Armenian reform movements demanded protections and autonomy. Tensions with Ottoman authorities escalated, culminating in periodic violence and massacres. Meanwhile, Arab intellectuals in Beirut, Damascus, and Cairo began to articulate ideas of Arab identity, laying the groundwork for future movements. The empire's rulers tried to respond ideologically. Under Sultan Abdul Hamid II, who reigned from 1876 to 1909, the empire briefly adopted a constitution and parliament, only to suspend them after a year. Abdul Hamid turned instead to pan-Islamism, presenting himself as caliph of all Muslims worldwide. He invested in railways like the Hejaz Railway, built to carry pilgrims to Mecca, and cultivated loyalty through Islamic solidarity. Yet his authoritarian rule alienated reformists. Among those reformists were the Young Turks, a movement of intellectuals and officers who demanded constitutionalism and modernization. In 1978, Their revolution forced Abdulhamid to restore the constitution and reconvene parliament. Hopes soared that the empire could be renewed on a modern, national basis. But events moved too quickly. The Balkan Albanian deception. Russians and Cosmotic cities like Celica fell outside Ottoman borders. In 1913, the empire was essentially confined to Anatolia, the Arab provinces, and a fragment of Thrace. The dream of a multi-ethnic empire was crumbling. Nationalism, once unleashed, could not be contained. The Ottoman Empire entered the 20th century, diminished, divided, and facing a final reckoning. The Armenian question and its global echoes. Nationalism's tragic apex involved the Armenians, whose demands for reform clashed with Ottoman insecurities amid World War I. By 1915, suspicions of Armenian collaboration with Russia led to mass deportations from eastern Anatolia. Ottoman officials ordered relocations to Syria, but marches turned deadly. Convoys endured starvation, attacks by irregulars, and massacres. Estimates of deaths range from 600,000 to 1.5 million, with Armenians viewing it as genocide, while Turkish perspectives emphasize wartime chaos and mutual violence. Accounts vary. US missionaries reported horrors like deportations, far from the front, with few survivors. Ottoman sources cite rebellions and Van as justification. Global reactions included European protests and aid efforts, but no intervention. A diary from an Armenian survivor might recount endless marches under guard, families perishing in deserts. This event reshaped demographics, scattering Armenians worldwide and fueling ongoing debates. It underscored nationalism's destructive force, hastening the empire's unraveling. The Great War and aftermath. The First World War delivered the final blow. In 1914, the empire entered the conflict on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary, hoping to regain prestige and lost lands. Instead, the war exposed its fragility. One of the empire's brightest moments came at Gallipoli, 1915-16. Allied forces, British, French, Australian, and New Zealander, attempted to seize the Dardanelles and capture Istanbul. Ottoman troops, led in part by a rising officer named Mustafa Kemal, held the heights and repelled wave after wave of landings. The victory became a source of immense pride, proving the Ottomans could still defend their heartland. Elsewhere, the war was disastrous. In the Caucasus, defeats against Russia were compounded by suspicion of Armenian collaboration, leading to mass deportations and deaths. In 1915, an event remembered by Armenians as genocide, and by Ottomans as a tragic wartime measure. The Arab provinces erupted in revolt, encouraged and armed by Britain. Sharif Hussein of Mecca led the Arab revolt, dramatized by the exploits of T. E. Lawrence. Ottoman forces struggled to hold Syria, Palestine, and Mesopotamia against British advances. By 1918, Arab cities from Damascus to Baghdad had fallen. The war drained the empire's resources. By the armistice in October 1918, Allied forces occupied Istanbul itself. The Treaty of Sèvres 1920 sought to partition Anatolia. Greece would take western lands. Italy and France would carve out zones of influence, and an independent Armenia and Kurdistan were proposed. The empire seemed on the verge of total dissolution. But resistance coalesced under Mustafa Kemal, later known as Ataturk. From Ankara, he rallied nationalist forces, defeating Greek armies and expelling foreign occupiers in the Turkish War of Independence, 1919-23. The 1923 Treaty of Lausanne recognized the new Republic of Turkey. The Ottoman dynasty was abolished, the Sultanate dissolved, and 6 centuries of empire ended. Yet the legacy of the Ottomans endured. Their architecture still defines city skylines from Istanbul to Sarajevo. Their cuisine, coffee, baklava, kebabs, spread across continents. Their legal and administrative systems shaped the successor states of the Balkans and Middle East. Their history of coexistence, however imperfect, foreshadowed modern debates about pluralism and identity. The Ottoman Empire was more than a state. It was a civilization. Rising from a small Anatolian principality, it became a superpower that shaped Europe, Asia, and Africa. It endured triumphs and tragedies, resilience and decline, before collapsing in the storm of global war. Its echoes remain, in domes and melodies, in languages and cuisines, in memories both proud and painful. To understand the Ottoman Empire is to grasp a world that lasted 6 centuries and left a mark on history that cannot be erased. From Osman's modest frontier principality to Suleiman's global empire, from the grandeur of Sinan's mosques to the tragedy of nationalist disintegration, the Ottoman story is one of both achievement and loss. It was a world of contrasts, tolerant yet hierarchical, brilliant yet fragile, deeply Islamic yet cosmopolitan. Its legacy continues in the modern Middle East, the Balkans, and Turkey itself. For 600 years, the Ottomans shaped the destiny of millions. Their rise and fall remind us of the power of resilience, the inevitability of change, and the enduring impact of civilizations on the tapestry of world history. Make sure to subscribe to our channel for more history documentaries, and tell us in the comments which part of this documentary was most interesting to you. Thank you for watching and being a part of our journey through history, and we'll see you in the next documentary.